Our children's lives were suddenly cut short, and at that moment, our children were happy after receiving plane tickets from us, but their lives were tragically cut short on this fateful journey. While we were still trying to recover from our loss, my husband's in-laws demanded that we either sell our house or provide them with money for a house for his brother. They are convinced that we don't need a house full of memories of our children now. Fate sometimes arranges such twists and turns that the world is literally turned upside down. But no one has the right to demand that we sacrifice our home, especially now, when every single thing in it reminds us of those we have lost. My husband's family is actively interfering in our lives, seeking to solve their financial difficulties at our expense. This is about the problems of his older brother David. David has a family of his own, a wife and 2 adult children who are not yet able to find stable employment. David himself often changes jobs, not staying in one place for a long time. He is known for his conflicts with colleagues and reputation of a man who does not bring things to the end. Long dreaming of a bigger house, they finally found a suitable option, but faced a lack of funds. Then David convinced his parents to get involved, and they decided to help. However, the money wasn't enough, and that's when David decided that we should provide the money. The parents began to insist that we provide the money to buy a house for David's family. I resented this cavalier attitude. If the request had been made in a respectful manner, perhaps I could have found a way to help, but instead we were given an ultimatum to pay almost half the cost of the house. For some reason they are convinced we have tons of money, we don't know where to put it. My husband, John, has always been a strict father. He believed that our children should grow up to be independent and responsible people. Perhaps it was his strictness and demanding nature that helped them to become so determined. Sam, our eldest son, showed an interest in science and technology from childhood. His passion for math and physics led him to decide to continue his education abroad. The University of Rennes, known for its strong educational programs, was the perfect choice for him. Lisa, our youngest daughter, a high school student, has always been more creative. She loves to draw and take pictures and has a passion for art history. When Sam offered her the opportunity to travel with him to France, she didn't hesitate for a minute. For her, it became an opportunity not only to spend time with her older brother, but also to immerse herself in the rich culture of this country. Lisa dreamed of visiting the famous museums of Paris, walking through the narrow streets of ancient cities and capturing all this in her photos. John and I thought for a long time about what gift to give our children for their accomplishments. In the end, we decided that the most valuable thing you can give young people is the opportunity to see the world and experience new things. So we bought them airplane tickets to France. It was something special because they were going there for the first time without us, completely on their own. When it was time to say goodbye, we all gathered at the airport. The kids were excited and very happy at the same time. Their eyes were glowing with anticipation of a new adventure. We hugged and I could feel how much they had grown. That hug was filled with warmth and pride at how mature and confident they had become. I stood at the terminal window and watched the plane slowly taxi onto the runway. I felt a mixture of different feelings inside me. Joy for the children, who were going on such an important trip, and a slight sadness that they were leaving home. But most of all, I felt proud. My children had truly become adults, able to cope with any difficulties and enjoy life. The airplane began to gain altitude, and soon it disappeared into the clouds. I knew that there would be many interesting moments, new acquaintances and unforgettable impressions ahead of them. Although I was already beginning to miss them, I was convinced that this trip would be a significant milestone in their lives. However, we had no idea what lay ahead of us. Joy was quickly replaced by dread. We waited for the children to contact us to inform us of their safe arrival. However, there was no call at the appointed time. We tried to comfort ourselves with the thought that they had probably decided to check into the hotel first and then contact us. Hour after hour passed, and our anxiety grew by the minute. Finally, the phone rang. But instead of our children's voices, we heard an unfamiliar voice telling us the terrible news. The plane had crashed. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat, and the whole world suddenly stopped. Pain shot through me, and I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. There were no words to describe the emotions that overwhelmed me at that moment. The world literally collapsed around me. John tried to comfort me, but he was in such a state of shock that it was as if he just blacked out. His face was pale, his gaze absent. We both stood there, unable to say a word, trying to comprehend what had happened. Time had stopped. My mind whirled with thoughts of what could have been different if we had made a different decision. But nothing could be changed now. The funeral was a blur. I was barely aware of what was happening, mechanically performing the rituals of farewell. People came up, saying words of sympathy, but their voices sounded muffled, as if from far away. All their speeches merged into a single hum, which did not reach my consciousness. There was an emptiness inside me, broken only by the endless flow of tears. All I could do was cry and ask myself questions that had no answers. How could life be so unfair? Why my children? Why were they the ones on that airplane? These thoughts swirled around in my head, giving me no rest day or night. It took a week after the funeral before reality slowly began to return. But there was a strange, heavy silence between John and me. We were both trying to cope with grief, but we were doing it in different ways. John began to drift into work, spending days at a time. The house became only a temporary refuge for him, where he could catch his breath for a while before returning to the hustle and bustle of office life. I, on the other hand, sought solace in my faith and among friends. I attended church and prayed, hoping to find peace and answers to my questions. My friends supported me, invited me to meetings, tried to distract me with conversations. But nothing could fill the void in my heart after the loss of my children. Every morning began the same way. I woke up with a feeling of heaviness in my soul, realizing that the past could not be returned. The rooms where Sam and Lisa had once played and laughed now stood empty and cold. I walked around the house, touching things that reminded me of them, trying to hold their images in my mind. In the evening, when John came home, we exchanged a few words, but the conversation never took hold. A wall of misunderstanding and pain grew between us that neither of us knew how to break down. About a month after the funeral, John's parents and his brother brought up the subject of buying a house again. But this time their proposal was much more radical. They said it would be best if we sold our house and bought a small apartment instead. They said that now that we were alone, we didn't need such a spacious house, and the money from the sale would help them realize their dream of having their own place. John was immediately in favor of the idea. When I heard that, I was dumbfounded. How could he say yes to something like that? Our house is more than just walls and a roof. It's the story of our family, the memories of every day spent with our children. Every corner of the house is soaked with their laughter, their presence. Selling our house would be a betrayal of their memory. But John remained adamant. He assured me that this decision would be good for his parents and his brother, and that we would be able to adapt to the new living conditions. His words sounded to me like a judgment. There seemed to be a huge gulf between us that could not be bridged. I felt completely abandoned, betrayed by my husband. At that moment, I finally realized that our bond was broken. John was no longer the man I knew and loved. He had become a complete stranger to me. After he agreed to sell our house, I realized that I could no longer stay close to him. He had turned his back on me, and my feelings for him had dried up, leaving only emptiness and disappointment. The only way out of this situation for me was divorce. The divorce process was extremely painful. We argued about everything, about the house, about money, about every little thing that had once been part of our life together. John insisted that selling the house was the right thing to do, but I stood my ground. It was important to me to keep something of our old life, some part of the memory of our children. Every single thing connected with them was of great importance to me, and I wasn't going to give that up. Finally, when all the legal formalities were completed, I moved into the small apartment. At first it seemed foreign and unfriendly. The cold walls, the empty rooms all reminded me that I was alone. But gradually I began to settle in. I hung pictures of our children, put up their favorite toys and books. I bought new curtains and carpets, trying to create a cozy atmosphere. The apartment became my refuge, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts and memories of the happy times spent with my children. At night I often sat in silence, looking at the photos and thinking about how my life had changed. The pain of losing my children and breaking up with John was still acute, but I was learning to live with it. In a way, this little apartment was a symbol of a new stage in my life. A stage full of hardship, but also hope for the future. The year flew by. During this time, I managed to get a job, make new acquaintances and friends who became real friends for me. But despite all the changes, the memory of my children remained with me always. From time to time, I would take their things in my hands and remember how they were cheerful, inquisitive, full of energy. These moments helped me to stay afloat, not to let the grief overwhelm me. One day, a friend dropped by and suggested that I go on a trip. At first, I hesitated. It was my first long-distance trip after my divorce. But then I decided it was worth a try. We went to France, visited Paris, walked along the Champs-Élysées, enjoyed the view of the Eiffel Tower. Then we traveled to Normandy, where we visited picturesque beaches and tasted local delicacies. This trip was a real eye-opener for me. It helped me take my mind off my gloomy thoughts and reminded me that the world is full of beauty and amazing places. When I returned home, I felt a change in me. I realized that life does go on, and that I had an obligation to live not only for myself, but also for the memory of my children. I started doing charity work, helping families facing the loss of loved ones. This activity made me feel that I was doing something useful, that my life was taking on a new meaning. By helping others, I found the strength to move forward. Every day was a step towards a new life filled with meaning and joy. Although I will never forget my children, I realize that they would have wanted me to continue living life to the fullest, enjoying every moment. Sometimes I think about John. He is in the past, and I am glad I was able to let him go. My life now is filled with new events, new encounters. And although there is no room in it for him, I am grateful for the years we spent together. Life goes on, and I'm ready to face it head on, because I know that there is always light in the vast darkness, if you look for it with an open heart.